Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Philanthropy. On today's episode, we are going to talk about how to love yourself. And this has been a topic that I've thought long and hard about for a couple weeks now because I wanted to get it right. It's a really important podcast for me because I think there's not enough self love in this world. And so I wanted to make sure that, it was impactful. And so I really hope that today that's what we get to, that you're feeling like, okay, I have a means to figure out how I can love myself better. And the benefits will be far reaching. If you love yourself so much more, you'll be kinder and more patient and loving with everybody in the world. And you'll find that your relationships start to change. And that's a really exciting part for me. And so, I'll give a little bit of a background here that, this is me coming to you about self-love as a single lady. I'm fresh off a breakup and it's okay. I'm going to live. It was, a mutual decision. And so I'll be good. I'll be fine. But I'm grateful that I'm doing it as a single person, just because I think there's more credibility when it comes to you from somebody who is not in a loving relationship. And I mean that in the sense that when somebody is in a relationship, we might look at them a little bit differently and think that, they already have love from somebody. They don't need to love themselves as much. But I disagree with that, of course. But I do recognize that my words will have more weight for people if I'm coming to you single, because then I have to be actively loving myself and filling in that void where we would have, a romantic partner likely, working towards filling that void in the traditional sense of relationships. And so to me, I thought, okay, this is a good time for me to do it between boyfriends because we still have to love ourselves, when there's nobody around. And the reason that this is important to me as a single person is because I think this is a valuable, beautiful time for people to be really examining their expectations in relationships. I really think that, we come into a relationship and we have a whole host of conditions for somebody to fulfill. Through the relationship, we reveal to them the things that we need and want and desire, and then we task it to them to fulfill those needs and wants and desires, which isn't always fair to the other party. And so that's why this is a really powerful time for us. We're going to look at those things that we traditionally put to others. Right? I had a really interesting discussion with somebody today about this, about self-love, because I said I was going to be taping this topic today and they were pretty excited about it. And I said, it's really simple. The way to love yourself is exactly how we love other people, right? So we have to look at what are all the ways that, we do to love another person and to feel loved. If you've been in a loving relationship and you think about all of the things that somebody did, well, they did this for me and they did that for me and I felt really loved at this time. And so many of us already have a lens of love. We've already seen what it looks like. If you've been in a loving relationship, you'll have a lot of experience with somebody who has done things for you that helped you to feel loved, and the things that you've done for others because you wanted them to feel loved. And so if you have seen that, then you'll know love is an energy. And when we understand that love is an energy, it is a power, then it's easy for us to say, okay, instead of using that power and that energy to love somebody else, what does that look like when I turn that around and I use that power, I use that energy to love myself? And the powerful thing about this is when we learn how to completely love ourselves, then we take a lot of pressure off of our partners. We take a lot of pressure off of those people around us that we do love in our relationships with them, our friends and our family. And instead of expecting them to love us and love us in the way that we prefer to be loved, because everybody needs to be loved differently or wants to be loved differently, now we take that pressure off of everybody and we can just relax in relationships and we can enjoy time with people a little bit more because we don't have this list of expectations that people are not fulfilling. And that often goes hand in hand with how much we need to control people, right? So a lot of times people who happen to be very controlling have this list of expectations that people need to be meeting, and love is no different. We use love as a form of control, and I hate to say it that way, but we really do. We say, okay, you know what? If you do X, Y, and Z, then you will have my love, then you will earn my love. And that's not fair. If they're not meeting our expectations, then we're not going to love them. And so then love becomes a commodity, if you look at it that way, and it becomes very transactional. And I have talked to a friend of mine about this, multiple times, because I know she has struggled to understand this concept, but that is the traditional model of love that we see in romance novels and Hollywood and that sort of thing where, well, they did all of these things for me, and so they win my love. And we see examples of that, that you should hold out and wait until the person does everything, the person who does the most for you, and they're always there and they're always serving you. And yes, those are definitely examples of love. But when we think, I'm not going to love you until you do something for me, then we start to see that transaction and we start to see dangers of love and why often we end up in these toxic cycles with people. So now to take a step back, and this is what I have traditionally coached my friends and I've worked on this myself for many, many years, is to, of course, love myself so much that I am full to the brim with love, and that all that I have to do now is my love pours out to other people, right? And so easier said than done, but it's possible. And of course, for me, I'm a yogi, and I say it, I don't know, probably at least half of my episodes I've said it. I always go to meditation, and I find that for myself, that is the natural source of love. When I am meditating, when I'm in prayer and I'm communing with the divine, I feel like that energy pours into me and fills me up. And then I don't need it from anybody else. And that's not to say that I don't love and appreciate when people show me acts of love and service and gifts and, that sort of thing. Of course, I appreciate it, but I don't expect it. If I get it, wonderful. If I don't get it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that I won't love these people or I'll love them less, because, I think every single one of us is placed where we're placed. Of course, if you look at yoga, it's, a blend of karma and dharma and all of these kinds of terms. But we're placed in unique situations for a reason. And, if we have the capacity to love those people around us, and every single one of us has challenging people around us, but if we look at that and we say, okay, I'm going to rise to this occasion, I'm going to learn how to love these people around me, then they're going to learn how to love too. Because a lot of times, you'll be the first person, and, the fact that you clicked on this video and you're listening, it means that you're, if you stick through the whole video, please stay, then you're going to learn how to love yourself, and you're going to be a prime example, a role model for all of these people around you. And then once they see you full of love and, being this amazing, wonderful person, they're going to say, well, how did you do that? What did you do and how did you do that? Show me the way, because every one of us needs to do that and needs to learn how to do that. And that is a huge challenge in our lives. And so that's why I'm grateful that I get to be here today and having this conversation with you, which I love having because it's one that I find I have a lot of. I end up talking to people about this topic a lot. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I get to do that again. There's a couple methods, that I think that we can examine. There's a very cerebral way that we can look at love. And there's also, of course, the meditation aspect. And we'll go into the meditation aspect, but first we'll do the cerebral way. And so I call it the cerebral way because this is the way that you are going to be looking at love with like lists and charts and trying to understand, what works for you. And some people will prefer that. And some people might do both methods, and hey, that's great. I'm happy, whatever works for you. But if we're going to do a cerebral approach, what I would recommend is, you're going to be doing some lists, you're going to be doing some digging deep into your memories and looking at different examples of love. And so, try and find a setting that is conducive to, making you feel like a natural loving energy. So obviously try not to do this in a hurried, frantic place. If you're on your work break and, there's a lot of people around you, I think that your nervous system will be a little bit heightened. You won't be very loving. So try and find some place where there's a natural energy that will support you. Maybe like your favorite cafe or bookstore where there's a little, comfy chair you can sit on, or maybe there's a garden, or if you're in a nice temperature climate right now that you can go out and sit by the beach or something like that. Find somewhere where you can just kind of chill and feel relaxed. And then, we'll take some paper and we'll look at the people around us who have loved us. And we're going to look for examples of what made us feel loved in our life. So we're going to look at your partners, past partners. What did they do, or what did they say, or what happened that made you feel loved in those relationships? And so write down all those things from your partners, past partners, and also family and friends. When you were around them, what was it about them that made you feel loved? And I can think of examples where, for instance, I had a mother-in-law and she was a wonderful, amazing person. And, everybody who knows her loves her so deeply. But the one thing that she did that I absolutely loved was that she had a way of looking at people with love in her eyes. The moment she saw you, her eyes just lit up. And she did this with like everybody, and it's like a special talent. And I remembered thinking that she just had to look at you and you're just like, oh, I feel so wonderful and loved. And I remember thinking that's something that I would love to cultivate in myself too. How do I do that? And so you study these people who are naturally loving and who make you feel alive and cherished. And so look at these examples, write them down, because these are things that are going to help drive your actions in the future, right? So thinking, and I can think of ex-partners who were very generous, very thoughtful. And when I was around them, I felt loved because I was very seen. They hung on to every word that I said, and they were able to like say it all back to me. So I knew they were listening. Not that I tested them, but you can definitely tell when somebody loves you. You can feel it because it's an energy. And so sit and write down all those people from your family, your friends, partners who made you feel loved. And sometimes it's your pets, because your pets, they enjoy your company. They cuddle with you. They don't talk. And they make you feel naturally relaxed and calm. And so write down all those things. And also, think of traits that people have too, so people that you adore and admire, write down the things that you notice about them that, really make you think, wow, this person is so patient. They're so forgiving. And I love that because when I'm around them, I feel accepted. I feel, and write down all the things that, whatever it is, that trait that they're doing, the thing that they do naturally, and how it makes you feel. So now you have all of your lists, and now that's going to start helping you to understand. I want you to just sit and look, and maybe you'll see themes. Maybe you'll see that 3 people that you really loved, they were all super patient or super kind with their words. And you'll start to understand, okay, for me, that felt really loving. And now you do a little check. How much do I do that? Do I do that enough? And then if we're looking at loving others, then, that's of course a great role model. And we're going to say, okay, I want to be like this person. So that's what I'm going to do with everybody else. But now also, let's turn that on ourselves. And we're going to look at all of those traits, and we admire when somebody's super patient. But are we patient with ourselves? Somebody who's forgiving, are we forgiving with ourselves? So really sit and unpack when you see the things, the traits, the qualities that you admire in somebody. And now we're going to turn that lens on ourselves, and we're going to say, how well am I doing with that? And then we're going to say, okay, maybe that'll be my goal this week, that I'm going to, practice forgiveness with myself. I'm going to do more check-ins. I'm going to say kinder things to myself. Whatever your list is, it's going to be very unique. It's going to be yours. And so you have to make a guide map for yourself. And that's the cerebral way. Okay. So if you are interested in the meditative way, then that one's going to be a little bit different. So of course, what I said before, and of course the very first episode in Philanthropy is a very brief meditation. So if you need to learn how to get through some of the basics and the mechanics of meditation, then you can go there. But for this one, let's think about, we want to look at loving ourselves. That means we're going to have to unpack a lot of information about ourselves, right? And so I want you to look at it in a threefold way, that when you're meditating, you can sit and meditate on the first part for a little bit and just see what comes up, right? So we're going to focus on, what are my strengths? What are the things that come naturally to me? And so we're going to sit and we're going to focus on that. We're going to turn that spotlight on ourselves inside. So you're going to close your eyes and you're going to think, what are my strengths? And I want you to, think about long and hard. Sometimes it'll be things that people have complimented you on already. And so that's how that knowledge might come to you, or things that just come naturally, easily to you. And you're going to make a little list for yourself, even just mentally. You don't have to write it down. But you're going to sit there and take stock of all of the things that your gifts in the world, your strengths, and that's information, because later on, of course, this is something that we'll need to refer to when we're having moments of doubt and insecurity, and that's normal for anybody. You're going to be able to refer to your list of strengths, because that's really important. It's part of our toolbox. It's going to help us. And the next thing is, things that we need to work on, because, if you're listening to this, you're probably looking at ways to love yourself better. And so that's what we're working on right now. So I want you to think of the things where you think, oh my gosh, you know what? I can be a little bit impatient. Maybe I lose my temper a little bit too much. Whatever your list is, the things that, they're your weaknesses, I guess. I don't like to say that weaknesses. It sounds so negative. So I usually refer to it as things that you could work on, right? So then write down all those things, that we all know are shortcomings. And so write down these things, and, these are the things that we're going to work on with love and grace and compassion, because, these are challenging areas for ourselves. And we know that. But also when we recognize that, then we also recognize it in other people too. That, if I have shortcomings, then they do too. And so if I'm giving myself grace, maybe I'll extend that and I'll, if I'm practicing that grace, then that becomes a skill. That becomes, part of my traits and characteristics. And so if I can do that with myself, then I can do that with somebody else. And so, it becomes a real asset because we're practicing it. So look at all those things and be honest with yourself, and hopefully your list isn't too long. And if it is, that's okay. At some point you'll get better at this, and so that will help you. And then the third part, when we're meditating, we're going to analyze the things that hurt us and people who have hurt us. And if you have had a significant amount of trauma, then I definitely suggest, if you haven't already been seeing a therapist, that you're working with that therapist or counselor, because that part of this exercise might be a little bit triggering. And so I definitely want you to have support if you're going to be going into any kind of trauma. But for some people, it might be not so much trauma, but lessons from past relationships and understanding the things that we said, the things that we did, or the things that other people said, the things other people did, and how they hurt us. And we're going to look at that information because, of course, you're going to need to heal that stuff inside of you if you really want to be in a loving state as often as humanly possible. It's really hard to do when we have these skeletons in the closet, we have these ghosts, and then we start to feel that we're living superficially. Part of that healing process is understanding why this hurt us. And that'll get us into the talk of boundaries. Oftentimes when we're hurt, somebody has crossed a boundary with us, or maybe we've even crossed our own boundaries, and maybe we're raging out too much recently, and we know that we did a lot of damage with that. And so we're not even living up to, our own standards. And so this is a time of reflection. If there has been any hurt, it's going to be hard to move forward until you do that work. And part of that work is identifying what hurt you, and it's learning how to process those feelings. And part of that, if you want to go to, we did a lot of processing work on, the anger episode. So if you go back and look for I think that was like maybe the second or third episode. And so, you can learn how to feel it, and then you can maybe start to heal some of that. Sometimes you might have to do some reparations in the form of apologies with other people. And so that'll be one part of it. So the meditation, we had 3 parts to it: identifying our strengths, identifying the things we want to work on, and then of course the third part, which is healing from those hurts, because it's really important for us to be truthful. If we want to be loving ourselves, we need to be honest, and we need to make sure that we're tapping in to what it feels like when we are in a happy and calm and loving state, because we want that to be our natural state. We want to stay in that state as often as possible. So like I said, you can't do that if you have a lot of hurts bothering you. So that'll be a good exercise to identify those things. And then, of course, let's look at the things that we can do now, because again, we're taking that energy, we're taking that focus of, I want to love myself. What are the ways that I can do that? And if you think about even the 5 Love Languages book by Gary Chapman, he talks about, let me see if I can remember them all. There is acts of service, words of affirmation, gifts, and physical touch, and quality time. So those are the 5 ways that people often express love. And we often have a need, right? We have needs deep inside. So that's even part of the meditation will probably reveal to you needs that you have deep inside, because that's where, when we start looking at expectations from people, that's because inside maybe we have needs or even standards. If we've been loved in a certain way by our parents, it becomes our normal. It becomes familiar to us. And if it's toxic, then we need to be honest with ourselves, because obviously that's not a good way for us to love ourselves, because then it often leads to addictions and harmful behaviors. And so we want to understand, what are the ways that help us to feel loved? And so now we're looking at, and if you're looking at those, 5 love languages, so those are ways that we can love another person, but those are also ways that we can love ourselves. You can do little check-ins. You could even do a list. I'm a big list person, so I like to see things, and then I can check off how well I'm doing. And I don't know, maybe it's a data thing. I'm half German. It's probably linked to that. I don't know, but in any case, you could sit there and say, okay, quality time, and self-love. How much quality time do I spend by myself? And this is something that people are often uncomfortable with. Like, let me go to dinner by myself, let me enjoy my own company. And some people have never gone to a movie by themselves. Recently, actually, the one person that I'd been telling you, we'd been having this conversation quite a bit about self-love. They used to make fun of me because I go to the movies often by myself. I'll go to dinner by myself, and honestly, I really enjoy my own company way too much. So, but when you can be comfortable with yourself, then you're really relaxed and you really take off that pressure of neediness, of needing somebody around all of the time. And so it can be very liberating, once you get comfortable in that space. But you have to understand that even as we're turning that focus on ourselves, we're learning how to love ourselves. Sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable at first. And so sometimes we're rewriting these paths towards loving ourselves, and it's going to be uncomfortable at first. That doesn't mean it's bad. It means you're training yourself to feel comfortable in this manner. So don't be afraid that if something doesn't feel amazing instantly, just give it a shot. Stick with it for a little bit, because you know what? It might be the best thing for you. So don't be afraid of that. That might be one. And then, of course, if we're looking at words of affirmation, how are we talking to ourselves? Are you having a lot of negative thoughts and negative self chatter? So then we're going to want to reduce that. We're going to want to replace it and say kind things to ourselves. And of course, we've definitely talked about that on some earlier podcasts too. So if you want to go back and check on those, that negative chatter is going to have a huge impact on you, because it becomes like a record where it's like constantly replaying in your head over and over again. And it becomes like a mantra. I've said that before. You want to make sure that if you're going to have anything going on in your head, that it's positive, that it's uplifting, that it helps you to feel loving and amazing. So make sure that you're stopping yourself if you find yourself talking nasty to yourself. And then, okay, let's see, presents. You could definitely treat yourself to small things. A really nice coffee. You could buy yourself something new. You could make yourself something if you're crafty. Often when we love somebody, we do tokens of appreciation. Maybe we'll get somebody a card or flowers. Buy yourself some flowers. These beautiful flowers were a gift from my son. And so, that was really wonderful. But, in the past, I've bought flowers for myself if I really love them, because I'm a flower girl. I love flowers. And so, treat yourself. Find little ways that'll be meaningful, that will be uplifting. And, you're going to give yourself an instant boost. Now, I don't want to encourage shopaholic behaviors because I know how addictive, Amazon Prime is and all of these other places that we can order from. But, you can still treat yourself with small things. It doesn't have to be something to get carried away with. Physical touch. If you're single, that's going to be a little bit more challenging, because especially if you really respond well to physical touch, but there are ways around it. You could go and get a massage. You could go and even get like a pedicure or manicure. Sometimes in the past, I've gone and sometimes they're really amazing hand massagers, and that could be really super fulfilling. You could also do that for yourself. You could give yourself, a lot of self-care, like grooming stuff, like shaving and, having baths and exfoliating, like if you respond well to physical touch, there are things that you could do, and of course, you might be a huggy person. You can hug a lot of your friends, and you could have pets, they're so soft and fluffy, and that's really a nice way to also receive that physical touch. So, I don't want you to feel that you have to run to another partner for that, because I know definitely there are people who will, because it's fulfilling a need, right? And that tactile sensation, it's stronger for some people. And so, book massages, do something like that, and that will still help you to feel good inside and that loving energy. And what was the last one? Acts of service. So doing things for yourself, right? And so if you think about the things that, gosh, I would really appreciate if somebody would do this for me, there's nothing stopping you from doing it for yourself, even if you don't know how to do it. Of course, I'm not going to encourage any dangerous behaviors, but if it's something simple that you could learn how to fix yourself, then YouTube it and try. I remember the first house that I bought, I was up north, and I was like, it was a struggle to get people out to come and help me. And so I had to learn how to do so many handy things around the house. And you know what? It was so empowering also, because I was able to take care of myself, take care of my own needs. And I was grateful for that, because I learned a lot of really new, weird, and random skills. And that's part of it too. I think whenever you build a skill set, you start to love yourself a lot more, and it's a lot easier, because you start to think, wow, look at my gifts, look at all the things that I can do in this world. And so if you're able to add to that, then you're going to feel better about yourself, and it's going to be easier to be loving towards yourself. But that being said, there are still, other things too. You can exercise. Exercise is a natural way to uplift yourself because of the endorphins. Meditation, of course, prayer. For me, it's always ways that I can connect to creator. So I'm a big ceremony person. I really love that. And so if there's anything that you can do to help you tap into that natural loving energy, that would definitely be another one. And surrounding yourself with loving people. And we're really blessed. I was having a conversation today with someone about that we are so blessed in this world that we are able to surround ourselves with people that we love and admire. And so even if we have challenging family members and friends, that we have the power that we can go out and we can expand our circles, and we can surround ourselves with people who help us to feel naturally loving. And then we'll learn from those people, right? And we can learn to love ourselves. And so the more that you can surround yourself with loving people, the easier it is, to start loving yourself. And then taking a moment for gratitude, that always helps, because we're going to take stock of all the things that we're grateful for in this world. And I think whenever you have an attitude of gratitude, then it's easier to feel loving energy. And when you feel that loving energy and you feel appreciative, then you start to feel a little bit more relaxed and loving in this world. And so we're able to, again, cultivate that loving energy inside of ourselves. So gratitude is a good one too. So if you don't have a gratitude journal, I would suggest getting one or making one, just because I think the more gratitude we have, the easier it is for us to see beauty in the world, because we're training ourselves to look for the beauty in the world and the beauty in ourselves, right? That's what we're really trying to practice today, looking for that beauty inside of ourselves. So I think we've covered pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. But I also wanted to have a special note on boundaries, just because I think it's really important for us to understand how boundaries help us to identify our needs, because a boundary is something that we put up. And if you look at like the circle of control, I think there's probably pictures of it on the internet. And in the circle of control, there's things that we can control inside of the circle. And then the outer circle, there's things that we can't control. And, a boundary is something that we put up even with others. And it's meant to protect us, but if you think about why we need that protection, it's because that boundary is going to help us to identify what has hurt us in the past. And that's why it's really important to go in and analyze those things that have hurt us in the past, because then we'll know where there's a natural boundary that maybe we've ignored, maybe we haven't, understood. And as soon as you start to understand those boundaries, you'll understand where you're going to hurt. And if you can understand, the things that hurt you, then you can understand, okay, you know what, these things are not going to put me in a loving energy. So if we want to protect ourselves, or if we want to look at that boundary, then a boundary is going to help us to identify, the things that will be harmful to us. And of course, self-respect is going to go hand in hand with your boundaries and self-love. And so when we put up boundaries, we're saying, I love myself, I respect myself, that I'm not okay with that kind of a behavior from other people. And we learn how to lovingly say that to others. And we learn how to honor ourselves by, making sure that boundary is not keeping out love, but it's helping us to understand that, if it's crossed, we're going to end up in, maybe some toxic territory. We're going to end up being hurt. And so we want to respect ourselves by honoring those boundaries and making sure that people understand them too. And not in a crazy way, but definitely saying, what, I have worked really hard to love myself and to cherish myself and to respect myself. And so it's really important for me that, the people around me also can honor those things. But in order to do that, you have to know what your boundaries are, and you have to know what your needs are and what you are protecting, right? And so that's where, a lot of that self-knowledge is going to come in place. And so the more that you're able to sit and understand your boundaries, hopefully you're able to understand your needs. Because at the end of the day, when we understand our needs and we start honoring those needs with ourselves, then we're going to relax and we're not going to have those expectations with other people. And when we do get into a relationship with somebody, then we're going to be able to be with them because, we love their energy, we love their companionship, that sort of thing. But if we've also learned how to love ourselves, we learn how to love other people too, because we know all the things that we like for ourselves and the things that we want to do for ourselves. And that's not selfish. If you're listening to this and you want to learn how to love yourself, it's because you're probably feeling like you're not getting enough love in the world. And that's why this episode hopefully will, help you with that you're able to start taking some energy and pouring into yourself and loving yourself. Because like I said, the ultimate goal is that, we're going to love ourselves so much that we don't put that need on anybody else. We don't need anybody to do anything for us. But if they do, wonderful. If they buy us flowers, that's amazing. But if I sit there and I pout and I'm like, you didn't get me flowers. Whoa, what kind of a son are you? He's probably not going to want to do it. And if he does it, he's going to be like, oh, I'm only doing this because she's crazy. So, if we're able to start doing these kinds of things for ourselves, then we reduce a lot of that craziness, and there'll be a lot less drama, hopefully, in your relationships, because you'll learn how to take care of yourself and you learn how to understand what it is that you're needing in the moment. And that's not to say that, being with somebody, you don't have a need for connection, right? If you're going to invest time and energy into a loving relationship, of course, you definitely want to have a good connection and feel connected with that partner. And so, you can express that and say, you know what, I have a need for connection. I am needing intimacy with you because I'm feeling disconnected. And I do think that, if we're in this loving relationship together, that, we need to cultivate that energy, that loving energy between us, right? Like I can love myself, but if I have a partner, I want to make sure that, we have this loving relationship and the love flows, and it feels natural and it feels like it's flowing. So yeah, I know that was a lot of information, and I really hope that it helps you, and it maybe gives you a little bit of boost that there's hope, because there is, a lot of these practices. That's what they are. They're practices. The more that you do them, the better you get at it, and the more love you're going to feel. And the more love that you feel, the more love you're going to give to others. And everybody's going to say, oh my God, how is this person so amazing? Trust me, it happens. I've been doing a lot of work on myself since, oh my gosh, I don't know when, probably yoga and meditation started. And I really do feel a lot of times that I'm like a very different person from where I started. And so that's why I love this podcast. I get to share a lot of the things that I know I've practiced and I've done in my own life, and I've seen great improvements. You'll get to that point where, yeah, you'll spend all day with yourself and you're like, God, this feels so fantastic. Oh no, why do I have to be with people? Just kidding. I really love people too. But I really I cherish those times, when I'm able to spend a little bit of time working on that loving energy. I know I'm recharging, and then when I get back out there and I'm with people, they just benefit, because then I'm in a happy state and I'm happy to be around them and help them and do whatever they need. So I hope that helps you. And I hope, you begin this new relationship with yourself if you haven't had it yet, and maybe you had it, you kind of started and you've done some things, but I really hope that you really fall deeply in love with yourself, because if you do, and not in a narcissistic way, but in a way that you really appreciate yourself and you really understand that Creator put you on this earth for a reason. And, you have beauty and gifts that nobody else in this world has, which is 100% true. And, you start to understand, that you have meaning and purpose, and, and beauty. There's beauty inside of your soul, that when you start to connect to that and cherish that, everything around you is going to change. Everybody around you too, because they're going to start noticing, and your relationships will start changing, and they'll all, I'm not going to say all of them will get better. I'll say most of them, because sometimes you'll also recognize that some people are maybe in a state that's so toxic that they have a lot of work they need to do on themselves. And so you just, maybe you part ways for a little bit and you pray for them and you say, you know what, I hope things get better for you. And, and if they do, then at some point, maybe we'll come back together, and, and maybe we can have a better relationship then. But for the time being, again, it's like those boundaries. You'll say, for the time being, I need to take care of myself, and I need to look out for myself and work on my own relationship with myself. And that's okay too, right? So I hope you have a wonderful journey. I hope you do some stuff for yourself today that helps you to feel, more loving towards yourself, because I think the world will benefit. And I'm really excited for you. I hope it turns out amazing. Let me know. Take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.